Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the news with b.c.begley. I am your host, and it's Monday, December the 1st, 2025, and let's jump right into the top news stories for today. U.S. and Ukrainian officials reported progress in Miami talks on President Trump's revised peace plan, though key issues still remain unresolved. The meeting followed a turbulent week in Kyiv, where lead negotiator Andrei Yermak resigned amid a major corruption probe. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Ukraine's Rustem Umerov called the 5-hour session productive, while noting that further negotiations with Russia are still required. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are expected to bring the updated proposal to Russia's Vladimir Putin this week, Axios has reported. Despite some agreements in principle, major friction persists over territory and security guarantees, and the Kremlin has signaled skepticism as Putin reiterates maximal territorial demands. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem claimed the suspect in the Washington, D.C. National Guard shootings was radicalized in the United States and blamed the Biden administration's vetting, even though the suspect's asylum was approved under the Trump administration. The suspect had worked with CIA-backed Afghanistan units and entered the United States in 2021 through Operation Allies Welcome, before receiving asylum in 2025. President Trump used the shooting to justify halting and reviewing asylum and green card processing, suggesting admissions could be paused indefinitely. Noem also defended her decision to continue deportation flights despite a federal judge's order, calling the judge activist and claiming her actions followed the law and presidential authority, The Guardian has reported. A contempt inquiry is underway over whether the Trump administration violated the court order, though the Department of Justice says the flights did not technically breach it. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro reappeared publicly on Sunday after days of speculation that he had fled the country amid rising tensions with the United States. He attended a specialty coffee awards event in Caracas, handing out medals and praising Venezuela's resilience without directly addressing the crisis. His return coincided with U.S. President Donald Trump confirming that he had recently spoken with Maduro by telephone, though neither government has commented on the call's content. The appearance came as the U.S. has deployed warships and thousands of troops to the region, actions Caracas views as an attempt to oust Maduro, CNN has reported. Meanwhile, Venezuelan officials focused on investigating recent U.S. maritime strikes, and President Trump downplayed suggestions that his warning about Venezuelan airspace signaled imminent military action. Lawmakers from both parties said they support investigations into U.S. military strikes on suspected drug smuggling vessels, after reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth verbally ordered all survivors of a September 2nd strike to be killed. Members of Congress stressed they do not yet know whether the allegation is true, but warned that such an order would be illegal and potentially a war crime. The bipartisan leadership of both the House and Senate Armed Services Committees has launched oversight inquiries, while Hegseth has dismissed the report as fabricated and insisted all operations comply with U.S. and international law. The controversy comes as President Donald Trump escalates pressure on Venezuela, confirms a recent call with Nicolas Maduro, and threatens to expand military actions tied to anti-drug operations, the AP reported. Trump said he believes Hegseth's denial, but added he would have not supported a follow-on strike targeting survivors. A shooting at a child's birthday party in Stockton, California, left 4 dead, including 3 children aged 8, 9, and 14, and 11 others injured. The attack occurred Saturday evening at the Monkey Space Banquet Hall with 100 to 150 attendees present, though no suspect or motive has yet been identified. Authorities are investigating, collecting witness statements, and reviewing video footage, asking the public for their assistance. Community members and faith leaders held vigils and offered support, condemning the violence and emphasizing that it should not be normalized, the Sacramento Bee has reported. Officials described the attack as, quote, senseless and heartbreaking, with early indications suggesting it may have been targeted. The death toll from a Hong Kong apartment complex fire rose to 146 as investigators recovered even more bodies from the buildings. Teams have found victims in apartment units and on rooftops, while 4 of the 7 blocks have been examined so far, and another 100 residents remain unaccounted for, and 79 were injured. Rescue efforts have been slowed due to darkness and limited access inside of the burned buildings. Residents and visitors have left flowers, notes, and donations at a growing memorial, mourning the tragedy, CBS News has reported. Authorities are investigating whether the fire safety violations contributed to the blaze, which occurred in buildings undergoing renovations with scaffolding and flammable panels. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formally requested a pardon amid his ongoing corruption trial, weeks after U.S. President Donald Trump urged Israeli President Isaac Herzog to grant clemency. Netanyahu faces charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery, including accepting gifts from wealthy individuals in exchange for favors, which could result in up to 10 years in prison for bribery and additional terms for other charges. He denied wrongdoing, calling the trial a witch hunt, and cited national security and political considerations, as well as Trump's support in seeking the pardon. The request is under review by Israel's Pardons Department, with some top ministers backing it, while opposition leaders criticize it as premature and politically motivated, NBC News has reported. Separately, Netanyahu faces an International Criminal Court arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Gaza, which Israel and the United States do not recognize. Swiss voters overwhelmingly rejected a proposed 50% tax on inheritance of 50 million francs or $62 million or more, with 78% voting against it. The measure, put forward by the leftist Social Democrats' youth wing, aimed to fund climate change initiatives. Critics and the Swiss government argued the tax could drive wealthy residents abroad and reduce tax revenue. The vote was seen as a test of public appetite for wealth redistribution amid rising living costs, CNBC has reported. Observers noted Switzerland's rejection contrasts moves in other countries like Norway to expand wealth taxes. China is rapidly developing a low-altitude economy centered on drones and electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, with Guangdong province leading the push. Several companies are pioneering drone deliveries, sightseeing services, and flying taxis, supported by government incentives and infrastructure expansion. In 2023, low-altitude operations generated $70 billion, and projections suggest growth to $490 billion by the year 2035, though airspace restrictions, uneven access, and safety concerns remain challenges. Shenzhen and other cities are offering prizes and certifications and flight stations to accelerate commercial operations, while military-controlled airspace is gradually being opened for civilian use, the Express has reported. Analysts expect tourism and industrial applications to precede passenger flying taxis, with China leveraging strong government coordination and technological expertise to dominate the sector despite late entry. Over 400 people have died and hundreds more injured after Cyclone Senyar caused severe flooding and landslides in Indonesia, particularly on the island of Sumatra, where thousands remain cut off from aid. The rare tropical storm swept away homes and submerged thousands of buildings. Torrential rains and storms have also affected Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka, leaving millions impacted and contributing to more than 900 deaths across Asia this month. Rescue workers are racing to reach isolated communities and deliver critical supplies, the BBC reported. The disaster highlights the increasing vulnerability of the region to extreme weather events. Okay, it's 14 past the hour, and here's a look at the live weather radar for the mainland 48. And let me just tell you, baby, it's cold outside, okay? I don't know what happened to you guys on Thanksgiving, but we got buried in snow here in the Midwest, all right? So hopefully everybody digs out and everybody warms up. All right, let's take a look at the national weather forecast for today. A new storm system will spread rain and messy wintry mix from the Ozarks and Mid-South into the Ohio Valley, with accumulating snow farther north. New England and the inland mid-Atlantic are expected to see their first major winter storm of the season Monday evening into Tuesday, bringing heavy snow and hazardous icing. Additional storms will affect the Northwest and the Rockies, with rain and mountain snow, while a clipper brings light snow to the northern plains and the upper Great Lakes. Temperatures will remain well below average across much of the central and the eastern parts of the United States, keeping the pattern feeling very wintry-like. Warmer conditions will hold near the Gulf Coast and gradually expand into the high plains by Tuesday. Thousands of Filipinos, including Roman Catholic clergy, protested Sunday, demanding swift prosecution of top officials implicated in a massive corruption scandal involving flawed or fake flood control projects. Left-wing groups held a separate rally calling for implicated officials to resign immediately. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. deployed more than 17,000 police as he struggled to contain public outrage and secure key government areas. The military rejected isolated calls for withdrawing support from Marcos, with retired and active leaders affirming their commitment to democratic stability, NPR has reported. Protesters urged the jailing of legislators, contractors, and officials tied to the scheme as the government freezes assets and arrests public works officers linked to billions of pesos in alleged graft. Global arms revenues rose 5.9% in 2024, reaching a record $679 billion, driven by the wars in Ukraine and Gaza and rising military spending worldwide. This, according to SIPRI. U.S. and European companies accounted for most of the growth, with American firms up 3.8% and European firms up 13%, amid heightened security concerns. Czech and Ukrainian defense companies saw especially sharp increases due to demand for artillery and wartime production. Russian companies' revenues rose 23%, despite sanctions and component shortages, while Israeli firms saw a 16% increase as global demand for their weapons remained strong, the AP has reported. Asia and Oceania were the only regions to decline, led by a 10% drop in Chinese companies' revenues after corruption investigations disrupted major procurement contracts. Austrian beauty influencer Stephanie Piper, 31 years old, was found dead in a suitcase in a Slovene forest after going missing following a Christmas party. Her ex-boyfriend allegedly confessed to strangling her, hiding her body, and later leading police to a site where he buried the suitcase. Neighbors reported hearing an argument and seeing the ex-boyfriend in her building the night she disappeared, Fox News has reported. He was arrested in Slovenia after being found near his burning car and then later extradited back to Austria, where two male relatives were also detained in connection with the case. Authorities say he has agreed to cooperate with investigators. Turkey and Kazakhstan condemned recent Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil assets in the Black Sea, warning that further strikes threaten regional energy supplies. The Turkish government criticized attacks on two Russian Shadow Fleet tankers within its exclusive economic zone, while Kazakhstan urged Ukraine to stop targeting the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's terminal, which handles 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports. Ukraine said the strikes were retaliatory actions against Russian aggression and insisted it had no intent to harm third countries. The attacks have disrupted oil flows through the Black Sea, raising concerns for nations still dependent on Russian energy, Newsweek has reported. Turkey, involved in ongoing peace efforts, is now working with multiple parties to prevent escalation in the region. Nearly a dozen U.S. warships, including the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, have been deployed to the Caribbean as tensions rise between President Trump and Venezuela. The deployment includes a Marine Expeditionary Unit capable of amphibious land operations as part of Operation Southern Spear, aimed at stopping narcotics flowing from Venezuela into the United States. Navy Secretary John Phelan said the mission is critical to defending the homeland, citing the high number of U.S. deaths linked to drugs. Roughly 15,000 U.S. personnel are now in the region, and Puerto Rico's Roosevelt Roads Naval Base has been reopened to support the buildup, the New York Post has reported. The operation aligns with Trump's broader push to modernize the military with advanced technologies and revive U.S. shipbuilding and manufacturing. A long-lost painting by Peter Paul Rubens, hidden for over 4 centuries, sold for €2.3 million, or $2.7 million, at the Versailles auction. The artwork, depicting the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, was discovered in a private Paris townhouse and had previously been undervalued at around €10,000. Experts authenticated it through the Rubenianum in Antwerp and scientific analysis of the paint layers, confirming Rubens' characteristic use of pigments. Art historians noted it is the only known Rubens painting showing Christ as a dead body on the cross with blood and water from his side, ABC News has reported. The painting had belonged to a 19th century French painter before being passed down through his family. Germany's AfD party launched its new youth organization, Generation Germany, on Saturday, amid protest by over 25,000 demonstrators, some of whom clashed with police. The party dissolved its previous youth group, the Young Alternative, earlier this year after it was classified as a right-wing extremist organization. Up to 5,000 police were deployed to manage the protest, using water cannons and pepper spray to clear blockades and control the crowds. AfD leaders emphasized closer oversight of the new group and urged young members to serve the party, framing the launch as a learning moment from past mistakes, the AP has reported. The party, Germany's largest opposition with over 20% of the national vote, continues to rise in polls despite mainstream parties refusing to cooperate with it. Pope Leo concluded his visit to Turkey before arriving in Lebanon to offer hope to its struggling population and support the country's Christian community. In Turkey, he visited a cathedral and Istanbul's Blue Mosque, promoting messages of peace and interfaith respect. In Lebanon, he faced a nation reeling from financial collapse, the 2020 Beirut port explosion, and ongoing tensions with Israel and Hezbollah. Pope Leo is expected to meet victims of the Beirut blast, engage with young Lebanese, and encourage Christians to remain or return back to the country, CBS News has reported. His visit is seen as a symbol of solidarity and a call for justice, peace, and the preservation of Lebanon's fragile Christian heritage. Asia-Pacific markets opened mixed on Monday as investors weighed weak Chinese manufacturing data and rising expectations of a U.S. Federal Reserve rate cut later this month. China's private manufacturing PMI fell to 49.9 in November, signaling contraction, while official data showed continued weakness in both factories and services. Hong Kong listed firms exposed to digital assets dropped sharply after the People's Bank of China issued warnings against illegal cryptocurrency activity. Major indexes in Japan, South Korea, Australia, India mostly declined, with Japan's Nikkei 225 falling 1.89%, CNBC has reported. U.S. futures were relatively flat following a strong post-Thanksgiving season where the Nasdaq, the S&P 500, and the Dow Jones all posted gains. South Korean authorities are investigating a major data breach at e-commerce giant Coupang, which exposed the personal information of over 33 million customers, marking the country's worst such incident in more than a decade. The breach, believed to have started on June 24th, involved overseas servers and exploited authentication vulnerabilities in Coupang systems. While names, email addresses, phone numbers, shipping addresses, and order histories were leaked, payment details and login credentials were reportedly unaffected. Coupang suspects a former Chinese employee who retained an active authentication key may have been responsible, Reuters has reported. Over 10,000 people have expressed interest in a potential class action lawsuit seeking compensation of roughly $68 per person. Today is December the 1st, 2025, and on this day in history, in the year 1913, Henry Ford installed the first moving assembly line for mass-producing cars, revolutionizing manufacturing. In the year 1918, the Kingdom of Iceland was formally established. And in the year 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama. Also, December the 1st is National Pie Day. Okay, it's 24 past the hour, and we're going to do a quick market update. Gold is up 0.38% today. Oil is up 1.28%. Bitcoin is down 6.14%. Yikes. The Dow Jones is down 0.45%. The S&P 500 is down 0.25% today. And the NASDAQ is currently down 0.22%. So, kind of a rough start to the markets this week. All right. Hey, while I got you here, real quick, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That way you can stay up to date on all of our news stories, our short news stories, and our live news show. And now let's go into the last block of news for today. 3 people died after a catamaran flipped over on a river in Florida on Saturday, authorities have reported. The accident occurred around 4 p.m. near the Cape Coral Yacht Club, with 4 people aboard at the time. 3 of the victims were recovered on Saturday, 2 of whom were pronounced dead, while the third was hospitalized in critical condition. On Sunday, a 4th victim, a 60-year-old who had been missing, was found dead by the U.S. Coast Guard, ABC News has reported. The cause of the accident is under investigation, and the victims' identities have not been released. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek threatened to investigate and prosecute federal immigration agents operating in the state, accusing the Department of Homeland Security of using violent actions and stoking fear under the guise of enforcement. In an Instagram video, she said Oregon would monitor all ICE operations, investigate misconduct, and hold officers accountable if they violate state law. Kotek criticized the use of excessive force and reckless tactics that endanger bystanders and local law enforcement. She emphasized that Oregon is a welcoming state for immigrants and refugees, while insisting public safety must be maintained responsibly, Breitbart News has reported. In a previous CBS News interview, Kotek called for federal agents in Portland to focus on de-escalation and let local law enforcement manage the protest. Luigi Maggione, 27 years old, accused of fatally shooting United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in Manhattan on December 4th of 2024, is set to appear in court on Monday, as his attorneys seek to suppress diary entries and other evidence in his state murder case. Maggione was arrested in Pennsylvania after a multi-day manhunt, with police seizing items from his backpack that prosecutors say tie him to the killing. His defense argues the search was illegal, and that certain evidence, including writings labeled a manifesto, could unfairly prejudice a jury. The state hearing is expected to last several days, with both sides calling witnesses, while a related federal death penalty case is scheduled for January the 9th, CNN has reported. Maggione has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. 2 terrorism-related murder charges in the state case were also dismissed. Travel across the United States was disrupted over the holiday weekend as winter storms and mandatory software updates grounded dozens of flights. On Sunday, FlightAware reported 12,113 delays and 1,424 cancellations, with major disruptions at airports in Chicago, New York, Boston, Des Moines, Fort Lauderdale, and Detroit. A Midwest and Great Lakes snowstorm dropped up to 10 inches of snow in parts of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, causing widespread travel delays. Additionally, the FAA required software updates on thousands of Airbus A320 and A321 planes, affecting JetBlue, Frontier, and Spirit Airlines. JetBlue alone canceled around 170 flights on Sunday, CBS News has reported. Rail travel was also impacted when a fire under Amtrak train cars in Providence, Rhode Island, forced service adjustments, though no injuries were reported. U.S. Black Friday retail sales rose 4.1% from last year, with online spending hitting $11.8 billion, up 9.1%, though inflation may mean real spending growth was closer to 1%. Consumer behavior is sharply divided. High-income shoppers continue to spend on luxury items and travel, while low- and middle-income consumers are cutting back due to rising prices and job concerns, reflecting a K-shaped economy. Higher costs for groceries, rent, heating, and tariffs are influencing shopping habits, with value and discounts becoming increasingly important. Retailers like Walmart, TJ Maxx, and Gap are benefiting from strong sales, while Target and Bath and Body Works face struggles, with consumers splurging less on themselves, CNN has reported. Despite economic pressures, the National Retail Federation expects overall holiday retail sales to rise 3.7% to 4.2% over last year, similar to 2024. A Massachusetts man, Brian Walsh, goes on trial Monday for the alleged murder of his wife, Anna Walsh, who disappeared on January 1st, 2023, and whose body has never been recovered. Prosecutors say Walsh made online searches related to dismemberment and body disposal immediately after her disappearance, and allegedly disposed of items linked to her in trash bags. Surveillance footage and recovered evidence, including a hatchet, hacksaw, and Anna Walsh's personal items, tie him to the crime. Anna had taken out a $2.7 million life insurance policy, naming her husband as the sole beneficiary, and the couple's 3 children are now in state custody, the AP has reported. The trial may be influenced by testimony from Massachusetts state police investigators, including one with a history of alleged bias in prior cases, raising questions about investigative conduct. Okay, everybody, it's 31 past the hour, and that is our show for today. We covered about 26 news stories in a half hour, which is probably more than you're going to get from any other show, and that's the point. Plus, I hope everybody learned something today, right? Bitcoin is down. In 1918, Iceland became a kingdom, and it's National Pie Day. And speaking of which, I got a homemade apple pie on my kitchen counter right now, and in about 10 minutes, that's where I'm going to be. So I will see everybody tomorrow for another episode of The News with b.c.begley at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon.